They say revenge is a poison you drink yourself, hoping the other person dies. But I spent 40 years proving that wrong until the day I held my dying daughter's hand and realized I've been the one dying all along. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of my small living room in Charleston, South Carolina, casting delicate shadows across the worn hardwood floors that had witnessed decades of footsteps, tears, and secrets. I sat in my late husband's rocking chair, the same one that had cradled 3 generations of our family, my weathered hands trembling slightly as I adjusted the microphone my granddaughter Emma had set up for me. At 78 years old, with silver hair pulled back in the same simple bun I'd worn for 50 years, I was finally ready to tell the story I'd kept locked away in the darkest corners of my heart. "Grandma, are you sure you want to do this?" Emma asked, her young face etched with concern that reminded me so much of my own daughter at that age. The resemblance was almost painful. The same deep brown eyes, the same questioning tilt of her head, the same gentle soul that wanted to protect everyone from hurt. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of every unspoken word pressing against my chest like stones. "If I don't tell this story now, sweetheart, I'll take these truths to my grave, and you'll never understand why your family tree has so many broken branches." My voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion I'd spent a lifetime learning to control. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold memories I was about to resurrect. She pressed record on her phone, and I took a deep breath, transported back to a time when I was young, hopeful, and didn't yet know that love could be both the greatest blessing and the most devastating curse. The beginning, 1965. My story begins in the summer of 1965, in a small town in rural Alabama where everyone knew everyone else's business and secrets were currency more valuable than gold. I was Margaret Ann Sullivan then, just 18 years old, with dreams bigger than the sky and a heart so full of hope it practically glowed. I worked at my father's general store, stocking shelves and ringing up purchases, watching the same familiar faces day after day, wondering if this was all life had to offer. That's when Thomas Whitmore walked into the store and everything changed. He was 22, newly graduated from college, something almost unheard of in our community, and he had that air about him that suggested he'd seen more of the world than our little town could offer. Tall and lean, with dark hair that fell carelessly across his forehead and eyes that seemed to hold universes of knowledge. He was unlike anyone I'd ever met. He was in town visiting his aunt for the summer before starting a job in Atlanta, and from the moment our eyes met across the canned goods aisle, I was lost. "You must be Mr. Sullivan's daughter," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "My aunt told me about you. Said you're the smartest girl in town." I blushed, unused to such direct compliments. In our community, women were praised for being demure, quiet, and obedient, not smart. "I just read a lot," I mumbled, arranging cans of peaches that didn't need arranging. "Reading is how we grow beyond our circumstances," Thomas said, leaning against the counter with an easy confidence that both intimidated and attracted me. "What are you reading now?" That simple question opened a door I didn't even know was closed. We talked for an hour that first day about books and dreams and the world beyond our small town's borders. He came back the next day and the next. And soon our conversations were unhappening over the counter but on long walks through the woods behind my father's property, where the pine trees whispered secrets and the creek sang songs of freedom. I fell in love with Thomas Whitmore, the way autumn leaves fall inevitable, beautiful and completely beyond my control. He made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. He listened to my thoughts about literature and life, my frustrations with the limited opportunities available to women in our town, my secret dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher someday. He never dismissed me or told me to be realistic. Instead, he encouraged me to reach higher, dream bigger, become more. "Margaret," he said one evening, as we sat by the creek, our feet dangling in the cool water, "you have a light inside you that this town is trying to dim. Don't let them extinguish it." But there was something Thomas hadn't told me. a truth that would shatter my innocent heart into pieces so small I'd spend the next decade trying to collect them all. Thomas was engaged. I discovered this devastating fact not from him, but from his aunt, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, who came into the store one afternoon with fire in her eyes and judgment dripping from every word. She cornered me while my father was in the back, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my chest like a weapon. "You stay away from my nephew," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "He has a fiancée waiting for him in Atlanta proper, woman from a good family. Whatever you think is happening between you two, it ends now. Girls like you are good for summer flings, but they don't marry men like Thomas." Each word was a knife, precise and cruel. The shame that flooded through me was so intense I thought I might drown in it. I'd been so foolish, so naive, so ready to believe that someone like Thomas could actually love someone like me. That evening, when Thomas came for our usual walk, I confronted him, tears streaming down my face, my voice shaking with betrayal and hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Why did you let me fall in love with you when you knew it could never be anything?" Thomas's face crumbled, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked unsure, vulnerable, lost. "Because I fell in love with you too," he whispered. "Margaret, I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel. These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. Caroline, my fiancée, it's an arrangement between our families. It's about connections and business and everything except love. What we have is real, but it can't be real if you're going to marry someone else." I sobbed, my heart breaking with each word. "Real would mean choosing me. Real would mean fighting for us. I am choosing you," Thomas said, grabbing my hands, his eyes desperate and pleading. "I'll break off the engagement. We'll figure it out. Just give me time." And because I was 18 and in love and wanted so desperately to believe in fairy tales, I gave him time. But time, I would learn, is not always a gift. The betrayal. 1966, 3 weeks after our tearful conversation by the creek, Thomas returned to Atlanta, promising to handle everything and come back for me. He wrote me letters, beautiful, passionate letters filled with promises of a future together. He described the apartment we'd have, the life we'd build, the love that would sustain us through any hardship. I kept those letters in a shoebox under my bed, reading them every night, letting his words wrap around me like a warm blanket. But the letters stopped coming in October. At first, I told myself he was busy handling the difficult situation with his fiancée and her family. Then I told myself the mail was slow. Then, as November turned to December and the first frost covered our town in white silence, I began to understand that I'd been abandoned. The truth arrived not through a letter, but through Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore herself, who came into the store one cold December morning with a newspaper tucked under her arm. She said nothing, simply laid the society section on the counter in front of me and walked out, leaving me to discover that Thomas Whitmore had married Carolyn Preston in a lavish ceremony in Atlanta, tended by 300 guests and featured prominently in the social pages. The photo showed Thomas in a tuxedo, his arm around a beautiful blonde woman in an elaborate white gown, both of them smiling as if they hadn't just destroyed another person's entire world. I made it to the back room before I collapsed, my body shaking with sobs so violent I thought I might break apart completely. My father found me there, read the newspaper, and said nothing, just held me while I cried. He never asked questions, never demanded explanations. He simply let me grieve for the future I'd imagined and the trust I'd lost. But the story doesn't end there. If only it had. In January, I discovered I was pregnant. The terror that gripped me when I realized what this meant in our small town in 1966 was absolute. Unmarried mothers were scandals, their children branded as illegitimate, their family shamed. I would be ruined, my father's business would suffer, and my child would grow up with the stigma of being born out of wedlock. I wrote to Thomas one desperate letter, explaining the situation and begging for help. I didn't want to break up his marriage, that ship had sailed, but I needed support, acknowledgement, something to help me navigate this impossible situation. His response came 3 weeks later. Not from him, but from a lawyer. The letter was cold, clinical, threatening. It denied any relationship between Mr. Whitmore and myself, suggested I was attempting to extort money from a prominent family, and warned that any further contact would result in legal action. Enclosed was a check for $500 hush money with instructions that cashing it would constitute acceptance of a legal agreement that I would make no further claims. I stared at that check for 3 days, feeling rage build inside me like a fire. Thomas hadn't just abandoned me, he'd denied me, erased our entire relationship, reduced what we'd shared to something dirty and shameful. He'd protected himself and his perfect new life while leaving me to face the consequences alone. That rage saved me. Instead of collapsing under the weight of shame and fear, I cashed that check and used the money to leave town. I told my father I was going to stay with my aunt in Charleston, LI. Since my aunt wanted nothing to do with a pregnant, unwed niece, instead, I found a boarding house that catered to women in trouble, spent my pregnancy working in a laundry, and gave birth to my daughter, Sarah, in June 1966, surrounded by strangers. The moment they placed Sarah in my arms, with her tiny, perfect fingers and her dark eyes that looked so much like her father's, something shifted inside me. The shame burned away, leaving only fierce protective love and a determination that my daughter would never feel unwanted or less than because of the circumstances of her birth. But with that love came something else. Something darker that would take root in my soul and grow like a poisonous vine over the decades to come. Revenge, the long game, 1967 to 1980. I didn't return to my hometown. Instead, I stayed in Charleston, found work as a seamstress, and raised Sarah on my own. It wasn't easy. We lived in a tiny apartment, counted pennies, and went without so many things. But we had each other, and I was determined to give my daughter a better life than the one I'd been offered. I also began planning. Revenge, I learned, is not about immediate action, but patient strategy. It's about understanding your enemy, learning their weaknesses, and striking when they're most vulnerable. I became a student of Thomas Whitmore's life, reading society pages, keeping track of his career advancement, learning about his family. He and Caroline had 2 children, a son named Thomas Jr. and a daughter named Elizabeth. His career flourished. He became a successful lawyer, then a partner at a prestigious firm, then a judge. From the outside, his life looked perfect: the beautiful wife, accomplished children, the respected career, the big house in the right neighborhood. But I knew the truth beneath the facade. I knew he was a liar and a coward. And I waited for my opportunity to reveal that truth to the world. Meanwhile, I met James Patterson in 1968. He was a good man, a carpenter who lost his wife to cancer, and understood what it meant to rebuild a life from ruins. He didn't care about Sarah's father or the circumstances of her birth. He simply loved us both and wanted to be part of our family. We married in 1969, and James legally adopted Sarah, giving her his last name and all the legitimacy society demanded. He was kind and patient, and I tried my best to be a good wife to him. But if I am being honest, and this is the time for honesty, I never loved James the way I loved Thomas. That capacity had been burned out of me, leaving only careful affection and grateful companionship. James deserved better, but he never complained. He built us a small house, taught Sarah how to ride a bike, showed up for every school play and parent-teacher conference, which was everything Thomas wasn't: reliable, honest, present. And yet I couldn't fully give him my heart because that broken, rage-filled organ was still fixated on the man who destroyed it. Sarah grew into a remarkable young woman, smart and compassionate and strong. She knew James was Ontario biological father. I'd told her an edited version of the story when she was old enough to understand, but she loved him as if he were. She called him Dad, valued his opinion, and mourned deeply when he died of a heart attack in 1985. I mourned too, though my grief was complicated by guilt. Had I cheated James out of a wife who could love him fully? Had my obsession with revenge poisoned what could have been a beautiful marriage? But even as I questioned these things, I didn't stop my campaign against Thomas Whitmore. The strike. 1985 to 1990, after James's death, something shifted in me. Sarah was grown, working as a teacher and engaged to a wonderful man named Robert. I'd spent nearly 20 years being a mother and wife, putting my vendetta on hold while I focused on building a stable life for my family. But with James gone and Sarah independent, the rage I'd suppressed came roaring back with renewed intensity. Thomas Whitmore was now a respected Superior Court judge, known for his family values and tough stance on criminal justice. He gave speeches about personal responsibility and moral character. He presided over cases involving custody disputes and child support, making decisions that affected families while having abandoned his own child. The hypocrisy was unbearable. I decided it was time to expose him. I hired a private investigator using money I carefully saved over the years to gather evidence of Thomas's relationship with me and Sarah as paternity. We tracked down people who'd seen us together in 1965, obtained copies of the threatening letter from his lawyer, and compiled a comprehensive file that proved beyond any doubt that Judge Thomas Whitmore had fathered a child out of wedlock and then denied her existence. My plan was to release this information to the press during his re-election campaign, destroying his reputation and career. I wanted him to feel the same public shame he'd forced me to endure. I wanted his perfect family to know the truth. I wanted justice. But I made one critical mistake. I told Sarah I thought she'd support me, share my righteous anger, want to see her biological father held accountable. Instead, she was horrified. "Mom, what are you doing?" she asked, her face pale as she looked through the file I'd assembled. "This is my life, my story, and you're turning it into a weapon. He deserves to face consequences," I argued, feeling defensive and misunderstood. "He can't just pretend we don't exist while lecturing others about morality." "But I'm not a consequence, Mom. I'm a person." Sarah's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "And if you expose this, my life becomes a scandal too. My students and colleagues will know. Robert's family will know. Everyone will look at me differently." "But you've done nothing wrong," I insisted, though doubt was beginning to creep into my certainty. "Neither have you," Sarah said softly, taking my hands. "Mom, you've spent my entire life proving that we're not defined by how I was conceived. You've shown me that family is about who shows up, who loves you, who chooses you. Dad James, he was my real father in every way that mattered. Thomas Whitmore is just a biological fact. Why give him more power over our lives?" Her words shook something loose inside me, but the rage was still there, burning. "He needs to pay for what he did. At what cost?" Sarah challenged. "Mom, I love you and I understand you're hurt, but this revenge you're planning it won't heal you. It'll just spread the pain to more people, including me. Please, I'm begging you, let it go." I wanted to let it go. Part of me knew Sarah was right. But the wounded 18-year-old girl inside me, the one who'd been betrayed and abandoned and denied, she wasn't ready to surrender. "I need time to think," I told Sarah, and she left my house that evening with slumped shoulders and disappointment in her eyes. For 3 months, I wrestled with the decision. The file sat in my desk drawer, a loaded gun waiting to be fired. Some days I was certain I'd go through with it, okay? Other days I thought about Sarah's words and wavered. The decision was made for me when Sarah came to my house in tears, her hand protectively covering her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "Mom, I'm going to have a baby." In that moment, looking at my daughter's tearful, joyful face, I understood what Sarah had been trying to tell me. This child, my grandchild, would be part of a long chain of love and pain, joy and sorrow. What legacy did I want to pass down? Did I want to teach this new generation that pain must be answered with pain, that wounds never heal, that the past is more important than the present? I destroyed the file that night, feeding page after page into the fireplace until nothing remained but ashes. I thought that was the end of it. I thought destroying the evidence meant destroying the whole revenge had on me. I was wrong. The poison spreads. 1990 to 2005, you see. Revenge isn't just something you plan. It's something that changes who you are, cell by cell, thought by thought, until you wake up one day and realize you've become someone you don't recognize. Even after I destroyed the file on Thomas Whitmore, the bitterness remained, seeping into other relationships like toxic waste. I became critical and judgmental, finding fault where none existed, unable to accept kindness without suspicion. I pushed away friends who tried to get close, convinced that everyone would eventually betray me. I held grudges over minor slights, unable to let go of perceived injustices. Sarah bore the brunt of this transformation, despite her pleas for me to release my anger. I couldn't stop myself from making subtle comments about her father, from reminding her of my sacrifices, from holding my pain over her like a debt she could never repay. When Emma was born in 1991, my beautiful granddaughter with her father's red hair and her mother's gentle spirit tie should have been filled with pure joy. Instead, I found myself looking at this innocent baby and thinking about Thomas Whitmore, about how he had grandchildren he acknowledged while denying Sarah's existence. The unforgiveness I carried affected how I loved Emma. I was present but distant, involved but not engaged. I came to school plays but stood in the back. I attended birthday parties but left early. I gave gifts but not myself. Sarah noticed, of course. How could she not? "Mom, why are you punishing Emma for something that has nothing to do with her?" She asked me one day when Emma was about 5. We were at a park watching Emma play on the swings, her laughter ringing through the air like music. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said defensively, though I knew it wasn't true. "You're not really here," Sarah said sadly. "You're physically present, but emotionally, you're still back in 1965 or 1985 or some other time when you were hurt. Emma is growing up with a grandmother who couldn't fully love her because you were too busy nursing old wounds." "That's not fair," I protested, but the words felt hollow. "What is not fair is that you've let one man's betrayal 40 years ago steal your ability to be present for your granddaughter now," Sarah replied, her voice firm but not unkind. "I know he hurt you, Mom. I know it was terrible. But at some point you have to decide. Do you want to be right about how you've been wronged? Or do you want to be free?" Her words haunted me, but still I couldn't change. The unforgiveness had become part of my identity, as essential to who I was as my name or my face. Without it, who would I be? If I let go of the anger, didn't that mean Thomas had one? Didn't that mean what he did was acceptable? These questions kept me trapped in a prison of my own making for another 15 years. During those years, I watched Sarah's marriage to Robert slowly unravel under the strain of trying to help me, support me, fix me. I watched Emma grow from a joyful child into a guarded teenager who learned to keep emotional distance from her grandmother. I watched opportunities for connection and love pass by because I was too focused on past grievances to embrace present blessings. In 2000, I received word that Thomas Whitmore had died of a stroke at age 73. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, satisfied. Instead, I felt nothing, just a vast emptiness where decades of rage had lived. He was gone, and I was still trapped. It's a reckoning. 2005 to 2010, the turning point came in 2005 when Sarah was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The news hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs and the strength from my legs. My daughter, my fierce, compassionate, patient daughter who'd put up with my bitterness for 40 years, was facing a battle for her life. For the first time in decades, something mattered more than my anger. I moved in with Sarah during her treatment, helping with household tasks, driving her to appointments, sitting with her through the nausea and exhaustion that followed chemotherapy. Emma was away at college, and Robert did his best, but it was clear their marriage had been too damaged to withstand this additional strain. They divorced quietly during Sarah's treatment, another casualty of the dysfunction I'd introduced into our family. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Sarah and I sat together in her living room, the silence heavy between us. She was wearing a colorful scarf wrapped around her head where her hair had once been. And her face was pale and thin, but her eyes, those eyes so much like Thomas's, held a clarity and peace that startled me. "Mom," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, fear immediately gripping my heart. Had the cancer spread? Was the treatment not working? "I've forgiven him," she said simply. "Thomas Whitmore, my biological father. I've forgiven him." I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. "How?" Finally managed. "How can you forgive someone who denied your existence?" Sarah smiled, a gentle expression that held wisdom earned through suffering. "Because holding on to anger about it was making me sick in ways that had nothing to do with cancer. Because forgiveness isn't about saying what he did was okay. It wasn't. It's about releasing my right to make him pay for it. It's about accepting that he made his choices, and those choices shaped my life. But they don't have to define it. But he doesn't deserve forgiveness," I argued, feeling my old defenses rising. "That's exactly why it's called forgiveness instead of justice," Sarah replied. "Mom, I had two fathers. One gave me DNA, and the other gave me everything else. Dad James E. chose me every single day. He showed up, loved me, supported me, and made me feel valued. Why should I give more power to the man who isn't there than to the man who was?" She paused, taking my hand in her thin, cold one. "And Mom, I forgive you too." "Forgive me," I echoed, tears suddenly streaming down my face. "For what?" "For not being fully present in my life because you were so focused on the past. For the burden of carrying your pain along with my own. For the ways your unforgiveness affected how you loved me and Emma." Sarah's voice was gentle, without accusation. "I forgive you, and I release you. You don't have to carry this anymore, Mom. It's killing you just as surely as this cancer might kill me." I sobbed then. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place so deep inside me I didn't know it existed. Sarah held me. This daughter who'd every right to resent me, who'd watched me choose anger over love for 40 years, and she offered me the grace I'd refused to give myself or anyone else. "I don't know how to let it go," I whispered through my tears. "The anger has been part of me for so long. I don't know who I am without it." "Then maybe it's time to find out," Sarah said softly. Sarah survived her cancer treatment, though the battle left her forever changed. But something had shifted between us during those months. For the first time in decades, I began the painful process of examining my life, my choices, my heart. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Chen, who didn't judge me when I talked about my decades of rage and plans for revenge. She helped me understand that my anger had been a way of protecting myself from the vulnerability of grief and loss. As long as I was angry, I didn't have to feel the deep sadness of having been abandoned by someone I loved. As long as I was planning revenge, I didn't have to face the reality that I couldn't change what had happened. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting," Dr. Chen told me during one session. "It's not pretending the harm didn't happen or that it didn't matter. It's acknowledging the truth of what occurred and choosing to release your claim on retribution. Saying, 'This happened, it hurt me, and I'm choosing to move forward anyway.'" The process was neither quick nor easy. Some days I felt like I was making progress, and other days I'd find myself spiraling back into old patterns of bitterness and blame. But slowly, painfully, I began to loosen my grip on the past. I wrote letters I never sent to Thomas, to his family, to my younger self, saying all the things I'd never been able to say. I grieved properly for the first time, allowing myself to feel the full weight of the loss and betrayal without immediately transmuting it into anger. I made amends with Sarah, apologizing specifically for the ways my unforgiveness had affected her life and our relationship. And slowly, tentatively, I began rebuilding my relationship with Emma, who was now in her 20s and understandably wary of getting too close to a grandmother who Dee always kept her at arm's length. The transformation, 2010 to 2020, the work of forgiveness I discovered is never truly finished. It's not a destination you reach, but a path you walk, sometimes stumbling, sometimes making progress. Always choosing again to release rather than retain. In 2012, something unexpected happened. Caroline Whitmore, Thomas's widow, reached out to me. She was 73, recently diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer, and wanted to meet. My first instinct was to refuse. What could this woman possibly have to say to me? But Sarah encouraged me to go, and Dr. Chen supported the idea, so I found myself sitting in a coffee shop in Atlanta, face to face with the woman who'd married the man I'd loved. Caroline was elegant even in illness, her white hair perfectly styled, her clothing expensive but understated. She ordered tea with shaking hands and took a long moment before speaking. "Thank you for coming," she said finally, her voice raspy from the cancer. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm not sure why I did," I admitted honestly. Caroline smiled slightly. "Because you're a better person than I am," she said. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. I've known about you and Sarah since 1966. The words hit me like a slap. What Thomas told me about the affair when he came back from Alabama that summer. He was torn, conflicted, and I gave him an ultimatum. Marry me as planned and never acknowledge you or the child or lose everything his family's support, his career prospects, all of it." Tears rolled down Caroline's thin face. "I was 21 and terrified of losing him. I thought if I could just get him to marry me, he'd forget about you. So I made him choose, and he chose me. I sat frozen, processing this information. All these years, I'd imagined Thomas as a villain acting alone, never considering that there might be more to the story. But it ruined our marriage," Carolyn continued. "We stayed together, had children, presented a perfect front to the world, but there was always this absence between us. He never fully gave me his heart, and I lived every day knowing I'd forced a choice rather than being chosen. Our children grew up in a home that looked ideal but felt hollow." She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her purse and slid it across the table. "This is a letter Thomas wrote before he died. Asked me to give it to you if I ever had the chance. I've been carrying it for 5 years. Not sure if I should try to find you. But now that I'm dying, I realized you deserve to know the truth." My hands shook as I took the letter, but I didn't open it right away. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Caroline. "'Cause I'm dying, and I want to die with a clear conscience," she said simply. "Because I'm sorry. 'Cause the choices I made as a frightened young woman affected your entire life. And that's not something you can fix with an apology. But it's all I have to offer." I looked at this elderly woman, dying and afraid, seeking absolution for a 50-year-old sin, and I saw myself. We'd both let one summer in 1965 define decades of our lives. We'd both made choices born of fear and pain that rippled out, affecting our children and grandchildren. We were both prisoners of the past, and now time was running out to be free. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. Not because she deserved it, not because it made what she did okay, but because I was tired of carrying hatred and I wanted to be free. Caroline sobbed, her thin shoulders shaking. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." We talked for another hour, two old women who'd loved the same flawed man, who'd let that love poison their lives, who'd finally found each other at the end. Caroline told me about her children, about how Thomas had withdrawn emotionally from the family over the years, about the price they'd all paid for choices made when they were young and afraid. When we parted, I held the letter from Thomas, unopened, in my hand. Caroline died 3 months later, and I attended her funeral, standing in the back, watching her children, who I now knew were Sarah's half-siblings, mourn their mother. It took me another year to open Thomas's letter. When I finally did, sitting alone in my house on a rainy afternoon, the words I found weren't the apology or explanation I'd been unconsciously waiting for. Instead, he wrote about regret, about how he'd been a coward at 22 and had spent the rest of his life living with that cowardice, about how he'd thought of me often, wondered about our child, carried the guilt of his choices like stones in his pockets. But he also acknowledged that he'd made his choice, lived with the consequences, and couldn't undo the past. The letter didn't absolve him or make what he did acceptable. But it humanized him, reminded me that he wasn't a cartoon villain but a flawed person who made terrible decisions and lived with the fallout. I forgave him then, truly forgave him. Not because he'd asked for it or earned it, but because I was ready to lay down the burden I'd carried for nearly 50 years. The reconciliation, 2020 to 2024, the last few years have been the best of my life. And I say that as a 70-year-old woman who's lived through heartbreak, betrayal, loss, and pain. Without the weight of unforgiveness crushing me, I've been able to fully embrace the relationships I'd been half present for. Emma and I have grown close, spending time together, sharing stories, building the connection I denied us both for so long. She's the one who suggested I record this story, who wanted to understand where she came from and the lessons I'd learned along the way. Sarah and I have reached a place of deep peace and understanding. Her cancer remains in remission, and we've had honest conversations about the past, about my failures as a mother, about the ways unforgiveness affected our family. She's helped me understand that forgiveness doesn't mean the harm can't happen, or that the consequences disappear. It means refusing to let the past control the present. Through Carolyn, before she died, I connected with Thomas's children's era's half-siblings. Thomas Jr. and Elizabeth were shocked to learn about their father's past, but after the initial disbelief, they welcomed Sarah into their lives. It's been healing for all of them to know the full truth of their family history, painful as it is. I've also worked to make amends in other relationships I damaged through my bitterness. I reconnected with old friends I'd pushed away, apologized to people I'd hurt with my judgmental attitude, and opened my heart to new connections I'd been too guarded to pursue. But perhaps most importantly, I've forgiven myself for being naive at 18, for trusting someone who betrayed me, for the decades I spent consumed by anger instead of present in love, for the ways my unforgiveness affected my daughter and granddaughter, for wasting precious time that I can never get back. Dr. Chen told me once that forgiveness is ultimately about accepting reality as it is, rather than demanding it be what we wish it had been. For so long, I'd been fighting against reality, insisting that Thomas should have chosen differently, that life should have been fair, that I shouldn't have had to suffer. All of that was true. He should have chosen better. Life should be fair. I shouldn't have suffered. But should have doesn't change what was. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It means acknowledging truth and choosing how to respond to it. I can acknowledge that I was betrayed and abandoned without spending the rest of my life in reaction to that betrayal. I can honor my younger self's pain without letting that pain define every subsequent day. The wisdom, lessons learned. Emma asked me what I've learned from this long, painful journey, and I've spent weeks trying to articulate the lessons that have cost me so much to understand. First, revenge is a prison you build for yourself while thinking you're punishing someone else. Thomas Whitmore lived his life largely unaffected by my rage. I was the one consumed by plans and bitterness. I was the one who couldn't sleep at night. I was the one whose relationships suffered. Revenge didn't hurt. It destroyed me. Second, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The medical research bears this out. Chronic anger affects your heart, your immune system, your mental health. I watched myself become someone bitter and critical. Someone who couldn't accept kindness or believe in goodness because I was so focused on the wrong that had been done to me. Third, forgiveness is not weakness, but the ultimate strength. It takes no courage to hold a grudge, to nurse a wound, to build a case against someone who's hurt you. Those are natural, easy responses. What takes real strength is looking at genuine harm, acknowledging its impact, and choosing to release your claim on retribution anyway. That S, not being a doormat or saying the harm did unmatter it. S, refusing to let the harm continue to control your life. Fourth, forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not the person who harmed you. Thomas Whitmore didn't benefit from my forgiveness. He was already dead. But I benefited enormously. Forgiveness freed me to live in the present, to love fully, to experience joy without the constant undertow of bitterness, pulling me back into the past. Fifth, time doesn't heal all wounds. Only attended wounds heal. I thought if I just waited long enough, the pain would fade on its own. Instead, unprocessed pain ferments into bitterness. Healing requires active work, feeling the feelings, grieving the losses, choosing again and again to move forward. Sixth, Your pain is valid, and so is your choice to heal from it. Both things can be true. What happened to me was genuinely wrong. Thomas's betrayal was real and consequential. Acknowledging that doesn't require me to remain stuck in victimhood forever. I can validate my pain and still choose healing. Seventh, forgiveness is a process, not an event. I didn't wake up one morning and suddenly feel completely free of anger. I had to choose forgiveness over and over, day after day, sometimes moment by moment. Some days were easier than others. The path wasn't linear. I'd make progress, then slip back into old patterns, then move forward again. That's not failure. That's the nature of deep change. Eighth, your story doesn't end with your worst day. For decades, I let that summer in 1965 define my entire narrative. I was the girl who was betrayed, the single mother who was abandoned, the woman who was wronged. But I'm so much more than what happened to me. I'm also the woman who survived, who raised a remarkable daughter, who built a life despite the obstacles, who eventually learned to forgive. The betrayal is part of my story, but it's not the whole story. Ninth, the people you refuse to forgive still take up residence in your heart and mind. They occupy valuable real estate that could be filled with love, joy, and peace. By refusing to forgive Thomas, I essentially let him live rent-free in my head for 50 years. He influenced my moods, my decisions, my relationships, all because I wouldn't evict him through forgiveness. Finally, it's never too late to change. I was 68 years old when I seriously began the work of forgiveness. I'd wasted 5 decades on bitterness, and I could have decided it was too late, that I was too old to change, that the patterns were too ingrained. But healing can happen at any age if you're willing to do the work. The best time to start healing was 50 years ago. The second best time is now, the present, full circle. As I finish recording this story, I'm aware that I've lived long enough to see the consequences of both unforgiveness and forgiveness play out in real time. The years I spent consumed by revenge were marked by shallow relationships, missed opportunities, and a constant underlying sense of dissatisfaction and anger. I was physically present but emotionally absent from the people who loved me. I survived but didn't truly live. The years since I began practicing forgiveness have been characterized by deeper connections, more joy, greater peace, and an ability to be present in each moment. I've laughed more in the past decade than in the previous 5 combined. I've cried healing tears instead of bitter ones. I've built real relationships instead of keeping everyone at arm's length. I look at Emma, now this beautiful, kind, strong young woman, and I'm grateful beyond words that she's known me in my forgiveness years rather than only in my revenge years. She's seen that people can change, that old women can learn new patterns, that it's never too late to choose differently. I think about Sarah and the relationship we have now compared to what we had for most of her life. We can talk about anything without the weight of my bitterness coloring every conversation. We can be in the same room without the ghost of Thomas Whitmore standing between us. We can enjoy each other's company without the constant undercurrent of unresolved pain. I've even developed relationships with Elizabeth and Thomas Jr., Sarah's half-siblings. They invite me to family gatherings now, and I go marveling at the strange ways life unfolds. Their children's, Sarah's, nieces and nephews, Emma's cousins, have enriched all of our lives. None of this would have been possible if I'd stayed locked in unforgiveness. But I also want to be honest about what forgiveness hasn't done. It hasn't changed the past. Thomas still betrayed me. I still spent my pregnancy alone and afraid. Sarah still grew up without knowing her biological father. Those facts remain true, and forgiveness doesn't erase them. Forgiveness also hasn't meant forgetting. I remember everything that happened. The memories don't have the same emotional charge they once did, but they're still there. I can look back at 18-year-old Margaret and feel compassion for her without being consumed by her pain. And forgiveness has meant reconciliation with Thomas that was impossible since he died. Before I was ready to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation with the person who harmed you. Sometimes reconciliation is impossible or unwise. Forgiveness is about your internal state, not necessarily your external relationship. What forgiveness has done is free me. It's given me back my life, my peace, my ability to love and be loved. It's allowed me to stop being defined by what was done to me and start being defined by who I choose to be. The end. A new beginning. If you'd asked me at 30 or 40 or even 50, if I thought I'd ever tell this story, I'd have said no. The shame was too great, the pain too raw, the anger too consuming. I spent decades hiding this history, pretending it hadn't shaped me, denying its impact on my family. But secrets keep us sick, and silence gives our wounds power they don't deserve. By telling this story, I'm not glorifying what happened or suggesting the harm was acceptable. I'm saying, this happened, it was terrible, and I survived it. More than survived, I eventually learned to thrive again. I'm telling this story for Emma, so she'll understand where she comes from and the lessons I learned too late to fully apply to my own life, but that I hope will guide hers. I'm telling it for anyone else who's carrying decades-old wounds, convinced they're too old or too damaged to heal. I'm telling it for the young women who might face betrayal and think it defines their worth. I'm telling it for anyone who's nursed revenge fantasies and thinks that's the path to peace. But mostly, I'm telling this story because speaking the truth is its own kind of forgiveness. By acknowledging what happened, naming my pain, confessing my failures, and sharing my journey toward healing, I'm releasing the last hold these events have on me. I'm choosing one final time to let the past be the past so the present can be fully lived. Someone once told me that our lives are like tapestries from the back. They look like a mess of tangled threads, knots, and random colors. But from the front, those same threads create a picture, a story, a work of art. For most of my life, I only saw the tangled back of the tapestry. Only now, at 78, can I step back and see the pattern that's emerged. The betrayal, the pain, the years of anger, the slow journey toward forgiveness, they're all threads in this tapestry. None of them can be removed without unraveling the whole thing. Sarah is part of this picture, and so is Emma, and so are all the people who've been touched by our story. The dark threads make the bright ones shine more brilliantly. The tangled knots hold everything together. I wouldn't choose to go through it again. If I could go back and warn my 18-year-old self not to fall for Thomas Whitmore, I would. But I can't. None of us can rewrite our past. We can only decide what to do with it. So I choose to see my story not as a tragedy, but as a journey from wound to wisdom, from victim to survivor to thriver. I choose to honor both the girl who was hurt and the woman who learned to heal. I choose to acknowledge my failures as a mother and grandmother while also celebrating the repair that happened when I finally did the work. Most of all, I choose forgiveness not as a one-time act, but as a daily practice. A way of moving through the world, a gift I give myself and others again and again. My name is Margaret Ann Patterson, formerly Sullivan, formerly Whitmore in heart, if never in name. I'm 78 years old, and this is my story of unspoken truths and the long road to forgiveness. If there's one thing I want anyone who hears this to understand, it's this. The weight you're carrying, the anger you're nursing, it's the forgiveness you're withholding. It's hurting you far more than the person who wronged you. You deserve to be free. And it's never, ever too late to begin. Emma stopped the recording, tears streaming down her face. She came to me and wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered. "Thank you for your truth. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for finally letting me really know you." I held my granddaughter close, feeling the warmth of her embrace, the acceptance in her tears, the love that had survived despite my years of emotional absence. This moment right here, right now, this was what forgiveness had given me. Not just freedom from the past, but the ability to be fully present for this precious, irreplaceable moment. Outside the window, the Charleston sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. A new day was ending, and another would begin tomorrow. That's how time works, relentless, forward, unstoppable. We can spend it looking backward, consumed by what was and what should have been. Or we can spend it looking forward, present to what is and what might yet be. For 50 years, I chose backward. Now, in the time I have left, I choose forward. And in that choice lies all the difference.